Welcome to Leaders in Lending. I'm your host, Jeff Keltner. This week, I'm joined by Rakesh Mirajkar from Capital One and also from the CBA Fraud Committee. So we're going to talk about, no bait and switch. We're talking about fraud. We're talking about fraud. Rakesh, I want to start, you help lead the CBA's Committee on Fraud. What's the topics that are top of mind for the committee this year? I imagine it's a pretty interesting time in the fraud space because there's so much turbulence in the market overall.
Yeah, it is very interesting times. And first of all, thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for joining us.
So if I think about the most prominent topics that we have been discussing in the fraud committee, we have seen a very big resurgence of fraud. So when we went into the pandemic, the banking industry saw a substantial dip in fraud activity.
Really?
And that was because fraudsters were attracted by all the government funds that were available. So their whole focus was on PPP and
stimulus checks
and everything. And then that money dried up. And we always knew that they were going to come back at the financial institutions, and they did. And it was the pace at which they came back was pretty significant. The other thing that happened during that transition is, as an industry, we went and adopted a lot of digital ways of transacting. So consumers were transacting more and more, not in person, but digital. And that's always an area where fraudsters like, because they're not going to be required to be in person. So those two things happened, that they wanted to come back and find a new avenue. And we had opened up and created a lot of features that are digitally available. And so it created a perfect environment for them to come. So we've seen a lot of fraud in lots of different ways. The third thing that had happened along this way is, imagine that everybody started to work from home. Consumers started doing digital activity. Consumer data was more large scale compromised across lots of different institutions. So now fraudsters have this amazing set of cleaned, pristine data that they can use against the financial institutions. So we saw fraud at scale. We saw a lot of bot activity. We saw a lot of really clean identities come through the doors as an industry. A lot of banks have very sophisticated defenses. So they were able to recognize it, prevent it, but it's a nuisance factor. You're constantly getting targeted and attacked on lots of different ways. And I know some of the banks had to really up their game, move from batch defenses to real-time defenses, and all of those things that happened. We saw also activity that we consider as traditional fraud, where checks fraud, felt like it's the thing of the past.
The old school,
but we saw the check fraud come up because a lot of stolen mail and fraudsters picking up the check from the mail and then making a counterfeit and then trying to go that at scale. And then we saw obviously some interesting fraud in the digital space. So we opened up digital, consumers started adopting digital, and guess what? That's where the fraud is going to go, because it's real time, it's instant. And we did see that. And then the last thing I would say, which I think you have heard a lot in the industry, is emergence of scams. So as the fraud community realized that banks have built really sophisticated signals and defenses, so instead of coming against and trying to find gaps, they still do that. In the bank's architecture, they started going and compromising the customers. So a lot of impersonation.
Yeah, the weaker link in the chain, so to speak.
The weaker link, and the social engineering, we saw a lot of that has come up. And they pretend to be either the banks or government agencies or whatnot. And so scam is through the roof as an industry.
Are these like real shifts from what you were seeing pre-pandemic when you said? It's kind of fascinating to me that the fraud kind of dialed. There's easier money to cheat for, and so you
exactly
targets of opportunity, right? And then it comes back. But when it came back, are these like different trends than you were seeing before? Or does it look similar to what was happening in 2019, 2018? In terms of the kinds of fraud that are most prevalent?
Yeah, I think the difference that we found was it's more automated. It's at scale. The pace of the fraud activity is tremendous. So what they're trying to do is open at scale thousands and millions of accounts at financial institutions. And then as soon as they open it, they want to try and commit fraud.
Yeah.
They're trying to link accounts, they're trying to move money. So the pace at which this is moving has really gone up.
One of the trends we noticed in our systems, I'm curious if you've seen this more broadly, is a slow kind of, I'll call it almost probing.
Yeah.
And then there's like, okay, we're trying little things. And then when we figure out the playbook, like if I do this and then 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 this, very specific to our institution, then all of a sudden, bam, there's like 100,000 people. It's like we found a little hole and we're going to jam as much fraud through that hole as we can until I think the expectation is that it will be closed relatively rapidly. But it's like, oh, if we find a little hole, we got to, then all of a sudden you just like, how are there 100,000 applications an hour from like Des Moines? Like that doesn't, that doesn't make any sense.
And we see a lot of international traffic come. So IP addresses that are not US based IP addresses. So they go outside. And when the banks recognize that and they're putting controls, they quickly switch their IP addresses to different locations. So the scale of sophistication has gone up.
Yeah, the thing that surprised me most when we saw shifting of IP addresses was shifting to even residential network blocks, where you're talking about, Comcast households and whatever in Midwestern city, and you went, oh my God, like that's not even like a big server IP block or something. It's like, it's very, very hard to distinguish those kind of IP addresses from normal ones.
Yeah, I agree. And then I think the interesting thing that was different from prior one was scams. Scams is a very different thing. We haven't seen the scale of the scams that we are seeing now.
What kind of scams are you seeing? Like, what's a typical attack look like in that space?
Yeah, it's a good question. So the new ones that we have started seeing is because online marketplaces have exploded. They try to pretend to be sellers. So what we call as puppy scams or concert ticket scams. So
get your Taylor Swift tickets over here.
Taylor Swift tickets, exactly. So you think that you're actually paying to somebody legitimate that you'll get this really nice, cute puppy with all the pictures and everything is very clear, and you send $3,000 to somebody and puppy is never going to show up.
Yeah.
So that has definitely gone up. The concert tickets is the same thing. So there is that level of scam that's happening. And then the other one that we have seen is typically fraudsters take advantage of the fear that consumers have. So a lot of scam that we see is taking advantage of the fear. So we see things such as government scams. So they pretend to be from IRS or someplace, and the conversation goes as, hey, you haven't paid the taxes and we are sending FBI. It's going to be at your door in 2 hours, but you have a way out. Like you can actually send money right now. I can take it and prevent that from happening. And it's really trying to pay the dynamics of whatever is the social situation in any residence that, oh my God, my spouse forgot to file the taxes. I don't want the cops to come over. Let me go ahead and make this payment. And they take advantage of that. We had a really good conversation yesterday around they're targeting vulnerable customers, particularly the adult population. And there are lots of different variations of that happens as well. Grandparent scams is a classic one. So they pretend to be your grandkid calling in saying that they are in trouble and can you send some money to get them out of the trouble. And we have seen versions of I was actually visiting this country and they have arrested me for something, and here's the grandparent thinking, oh my God, my grandkid did something silly and now they are incarcerated. So gotta do something about that. And then we send money
and the money's gone. That's interesting. It's this fascinating question to me when the scams shift to the consumer as the target, because there's kind of question of like, how responsible is the bank ultimately? Like attack credentials, or these are often like real customers doing real activities. And you're saying, well, you don't want me to not do what you say with your money. And yet you want to be made whole when you cheated in a scam like this. And, there's, I think, consumer education. We had a guest on recently who was talking about how they had educated their consumers about some fraud and scam attacks. And the consumer walked into the branch. This is what you told me about. The scammers on the phone right now trying to get my money. And the bank was very proud they'd done that. But do you see a role for government or other institutions to help on the consumer education side? Because it doesn't feel like it's entirely the responsibility of the banks to educate consumers and to help prevent on that attack vector, because it's not in some real way attacking the bank. It's a very different kind of thing.
I think it's such a great question. We should all work as a community to help our consumers. Like banks definitely need to play a role, and I'll talk about that. Governments can play a huge role here. So they are trusted, they have funds, they can reach mass scale consumers in a very effective way. And it's not about one bank doing it, it's about the entire community getting ready for that. Yeah. And we have seen some really effective campaigns, particularly in the European countries. The good news is we are seeing a lot more awareness and interest from government agency, particularly CFPB has shown keen interest in how they can lean in and help. And they have budget as well. So we hope that they actually go in the direction of using that
effectively
for the consumer education. Banks can play a lot of role too, because consumers trust their banks. So we have been doing a bunch of campaigning and consumer education, both in person in branches and for Capital One, it's cafes, but also emails and reaching consumers where they are and telling them about common schemes and what to watch out for. And we've seen a huge impact of those campaigns. The other thing that I feel is important for banks to do is, just like you're trying to spot fraud, even if your consumer is making a transaction and you can recognize that, in the moment, can you tell the consumers that watch out for these scams and give them the information right there? And that has been extremely effective. Because consumers are doing a transaction and then they pause. And then you click on it and then you read about, oh my God, that's exactly what's happening to me.
Maybe I should call my grandson before I send the money to get him out of prison and see if maybe he's, no, I'm home.
Exactly.
Oh, no problems.
Exactly. That's super helpful if you do it that way. And then, of course, law enforcement can play a huge role as well. Some of these fraud and scam activity is happening internationally.
Yeah,
and I know
a lot of it's coming from international.
Exactly. And they're partnering with the law enforcement in those respective countries and trying to break that cartel network, but they can play a huge role as well.
Interesting. Have you seen anybody? I imagine the answer to this is no, but it just comes up. Like I know in many companies, you get the IT security department sending the seemingly like sending the fake scam. And then when you click on it, they go, just so you know, like you failed the test. And we got a little, I always enjoy, because there's a little button in our system where I can say, like, I think this one's spam. And if they send you the target test and you get it, they like you a little, okay, I call it, you can't fool me with this one, guys. But I don't know if anybody's gone to that kind of faking attacks on their consumer. That's maybe too much for the consumer.
But that may be, I don't know, that may be going a little too beyond. But yes, I also get those emails from
your IT security.
But I think it is more about the education and how you can engage with the consumers. So we do a bunch of campaigns in our cafes. And then we also partner with National Council of Aging for creating some virtual workshops, particularly aimed at the elderly population. So that they understand how they can be empowering them to use digital technologies. The other thing that we have observed, because we keep looking at what kind of frauds are coming up, but this tech support scam is a big thing.
What is that?
So consumers, when they are on their computers, they suddenly get, or they can get a phone call or an email, but they get a message saying, hey, we detected virus on your computer. Something's wrong happening. This is Amazon or whichever the tech company is. Call us. And then the consumer calls. Of course, they are talking to the scammer. And then the scammer pretends to be doing a service for them and say that I need to get into your computer and clean it up.
Oh, God.
So they give live access, remote access of their computer. So guess what? The fraudsters are coming in and they're putting all these kind of fake analytics on their computer saying, hey, we detected thousands of viruses, and then they show a trigger as if it's cleaning up those viruses. At this point, consumers are completely believing that, oh my God, I was in a bad shape. Thank God this person is helping me. And then now they have the remote access and they get into their financial organizations or whatever and start making transactions.
Yeah, I've spent a lot of time with my kids going like, when you get an email, like if I get a call from American Express, like, when I get an email from Amex or Capital One saying, hey, you got to get from your card. What do you think I do? They say, you call the number on the back of the card. You don't respond to the email. You don't call the number of the email. You pick up your card and go, I'm going to call on this number.
Always.
So just trying to teach the basics.
Always.
I loved your point about the real-time intervention for scams, when you can like help someone in the moment who's maybe about to complete a transaction to a scammer, and you say, hey, have you thought about this? Or is this what's happening? The thing that occurs to me is that kind of real-time identifying of that and reacting to it requires quite a bit of both data and intelligence in terms of real-time systems and analysis to see it in real time, and then the data to actually be able to analyze that and look at it. So there's a lot of investment in that. And I'm curious how you think about the investments that are being made in the technology shifting and where the priorities are. Because it's like, that's a very sophisticated thing to be able to do. But if you say, hey, we do a batch process every night, so tomorrow morning I'm going to tell 50 people that they got fell victim to a scam, but it doesn't help me in the moment. How do you see people investing? What are the recommendations you have for how you invest the technology to allow you to move to kind of like that real-time nature? Because that's pretty sophisticated.
It is very sophisticated. Batch is completely old school now. You shouldn't think about batch. When the world has moved real time, payments have moved real time, your controls need to be real time. And it's important to even internalize what real time really means. Because for some people, real time could be that very second, and for some people, it could be a few minutes off. And in the world of real time, even seconds matter.
Yeah.
I was talking to a colleague from one of the banks, and they were having some fraud issue, and I was asking them, but don't you have defenses that are real time? And her response was, yes, we do. But by the time this thing happens and we get it into our defenses, there's a 15-minute gap. And
so then that's not real time.
15 minutes is way too long a time for fraudsters to take advantage of.
Yeah.
I think the way we want to think about this is, just as the technology and data has exploded, you can take advantage of that. Because you get access to thousands of features and variables on any given transaction that consumers are trying to do. And if you're creating your systems that can listen and consume those signals in real time, use them, consume them, create analytics, create models, and then predict that, is this really something that your consumers are trying to do, or is it somebody else? The power of that real-time detection can be tremendous. A lot of technology changes are happening. We can now consume large sets of data in milliseconds, microseconds. The computing power has increased, so we can crunch the data in real time. Like it wasn't possible a few years ago. And the modeling techniques have improved. So
dramatically.
GVMs and others, it can be very surgical. I always get into this conversation also with my fraud colleagues from the banks that there is tremendous pressure on cost efficiencies and things like that. But if you think about what you're doing with fraud risk controls, it's the right thing to do. You're protecting the consumers. There's a bottom line impact. You're preventing bank against the losses. But the real impact is what you can enable on the other side with the business.
Meaning?
So if your fraud controls are tremendous, you can enable a lot more things for consumers to do. So you can now allow and open up real-time activity, whether it's wires or ACH or P2P transactions. Consumers can do everything sitting in their living room on a small device in their hand. The only reason we don't allow them to do as much is because we fear that we want to have fraud controls.
The other thing I'd love to get your take on is I think when you move to the kind of model-based world versus kind of an old school rules-based approach, you end up with this kind of layering of defenses, which is like, I don't have to be 100% sure. And the real-time example, I have to be like, I got a bunch of signals, and each signal like pushes me a little bit. This looks more like fraud, a little bit more like fraud. And I don't have to say, you can't complete the transaction, Mr. Customer. I go, I'd like you to talk to an agent first, which I may do a little bit, or I need you to do a knowledge-based authentication, or I need to get a text message. Like there's all sorts of layering of what is the kind of friction I might put in the process. I don't have to be like 100% sure this is fraud I'm stopping. Well, now looks like a higher risk. What level of friction or additional process can I layer in? And there might be multiple of those layers. So talk to me about how you design that, because I think that's so important to saying, how do I go from yes, no, like this is or isn't fraud, and I'm going to stop it or allow it, to like, how do I introduce a little friction to try and reduce the likelihood that a fraudster can complete a transaction as my risk perception increases?
It's a great question. So there are some transactions or signals that you will think are very, very clear signals that you can take a decision on. This is just clearly fraud, or this is clearly a customer data.
Yeah.
It's somewhere in the middle that when all this complexity comes in. And for us, the way we want to think about this is we are in this together with our consumers. So when you are in that kind of uncertain phase, how do you reach out and engage with the consumers to confirm? Because there's one person who can always tell you that if they are making the transaction or not. It's our consumers. But then you have to create systems that you detect it real time. How can you reach the consumers real time in the channels that they prefer, so that it's not just limited to one?
Yep.
And then when they're responding, how do you consume that response and then let them continue with the transactions that you're trying to do? So that system requires certain of investment and thinking and design and clarity of messages for the consumers. All of that, you have to think about it holistically.
Yeah, I also love your point about thinking about the other side, because I feel like, at least when we approach this, it's always this kind of battle between how much can you make things instant and immediate. And of course, you can do it 100%. It's really easy. You just have a lot of fraud, and you can have zero risk of fraud and everything be super painful.
Exactly.
In the battle is like, how far can I push the limit on instant and keep the fraud low at the same time? Exactly. And I do think in the world of digital, you're in a world where like the instant actually is a pretty tremendous differentiator, or at least requirement to be competitive in certain environments. So allowing the lack of sophistication on your fraud side to prevent that is like, that's becoming a larger and larger liability, I think, for banks not to be competitive on the consumer side.
I totally agree with you on that one. And I think it's a shared responsibility. It's not just banks' job to do it. I think it's consumers' job to prevent and protect them as well.
For sure.
And it is government's job to actually help us design a solution or an environment that's conducive for banks and consumers to work on this thing together. So collectively, I think we can do it. Some of the international countries have made tremendous progress on those domains. I go to India for my vacations, and I see that India is completely digital now. And they have all created really sophisticated ways of banks and consumers reacting and interacting in real time.
Interesting. I do want to slide back to your comment on the shift to digital, because I think we a lot of what we talk about is digital influenced, but I'm curious, what are as more and more transactions are going digital, what are the trends in fraud or the investments you see people making that are related to kind of like, I think so many of, particularly smaller community banks, maybe not Capital One, but are have a little more trust. Like in the lending space, we bring you in and check your ID and like feel pretty good when Jeff comes in with Jeff's ID and Jeff's social security number. And there are so many of the processes that are kind of the fraud mechanisms are oriented around in-person experiences. And as you move digital, you got to find a new way to handle that. And I'm curious what you're seeing as the trends in that kind of shifting the fraud detection as we move, and the prevention as we move pure digital in so many of our transactions that used to be face-to-face mediated, and it had very different mechanisms of protection that aren't available.
Yeah, I agree with you. But I would also say that digital provides its own unique way of confirming the identity of an individual. Your device has so many signals. And if you're able to bind your device to your consumers very, very clearly, then that is actually a tremendous way of detecting who is performing the transaction. Now, fraudsters are always trying to emulate devices and see if they are clear or not. But I actually think that in some regards, the transactions that happen digitally can be safer if a bank is able to consume all the information from those digital transactions. And bigger banks have put in tremendous amount of investment to consume those real time. But even for smaller community banks, there are lots of players that are out there in the market that can actually make it easy for them. So they don't have to do it on their own. But there are so many players, like even in this conference, you will see that there are so many players out there who are creating solutions that the banks can plug into.
Yeah, maybe the advice I would give to the smaller banks that listen is like, one of the flaws I've seen is trying to, when you digitize, I think of digitizing the current approaches. And to your point, I think it's like, you lose a few signals. Right. I get, but trying to replace those by uploading a driver's license and having a video call at the same time, saying, "Hey, I'm trying to do the same thing in the digital." It's like, well, no, there are now unique signals that were not available to you before, and you should be taking advantage of those and rebuilding your approach based on that. Right. Otherwise, you can I don't think that trying to make it feel like you're in the branch showing your photo ID is gonna be the way to do it.
I agree with that. And a lot of these technologies are getting more and more sophisticated. Facial recognition, like Apple's made so many things so much more fluent.
Yeah.
And as this technology just improves, you can bind the identity of an individual in a much
very
more
clearly,
very clear way.
And enable that frictionless real-time transaction capability.
Exactly.
So last question for you. What's like for people out there listening, go, hey, I see these problems too. I say, what's your advice on how they prepare for the future investments that they should be focused on making to be in position to, actually defend most effectively against these kinds of things moving forward?
Yeah. So I would say that it's a never-ending game. So
makes it fun.
It makes it fun. But there's so much of advantage that you get when you get it right. But don't rest on your laurels. So, that fraud is always going to change. Now we have seen things such as ChatGPT and all these artificial intelligence tools are going to come. So we'll see a very different level of challenge. The voice recognition is going to be difficult. Almost like in old school, you would get a spoofed email. Yep. And it will have typo errors, and you would know that if a reasonable person reads the email, I don't think this is a professional email. But with things like ChatGPT, that thing is going to feel more professional, feel more a corporate is sending it. So trends will keep changing, and you almost have to be on front of that trend change, anticipate where it is going, and start building your solutions right away. It's a race that's going to happen between the banks as well as between the fraud community on how do you leverage the technology to be ahead of each other. So there is no point in relaxing and saying, oh, I did all this investment, I can relax now. No, you have to constantly be on your toes. So I think but take advantage of it because there's a tremendous amount of capability that's coming to the banks as well. The second thing I would say is engage with your consumers. It's important to educate your consumers. It is important to take them into confidence. The more your consumers are digitally savvy and know what to watch out for, the better you would be. So it's really, really important to do that. And as a consumer, I would say just pay attention. It's your money. You need to take a look at it. I always tell my friends and family that look at your banking accounts. Have a habit to look at them almost every other week. Even if you're not using them, you don't know who else is using them. So just open up the statements and see how your transactions are, because it's your responsibility. If you find something bad or unexpected, you're the one who need to contact the banks and tell them.
Yeah, I've actually pushed myself and my family. We're more like real-time alerts. Like I find looking through my is a credit card is a simple example. Looking through the statement once a month takes a lot of time. Yeah. Getting a real-time alert saying, "Hey, you just bought something." Oh, yeah, I know, no big deal. Yeah. A real-time alert saying, "You just bought something." I did.
Yeah.
Wait. So I'm occasionally call my wife going, I don't recognize this company for this charge. It's not a problem. It's okay to spend the money. But I just want to make sure that was you and not somebody else. But that real time nature for me it makes it more digestible, right? Not so much as saying, hey, what all did we spend last month? Did you really go to the gas station on the 31st? I don't remember on the 31st. So, but trying to do that as a consumer, be cognizant is important.
Yeah.
And how about the community among banks? It feels like this is a bit of a collective problem and a collective sharing of information. Is there a good collaboration among peers to help identify what's coming and see how we can all respond effectively?
Yeah, fraud is one place where the banks collaborate pretty heavily because we're fighting the same game against the bad people. So we are all in it together. So we share our best practices. Collectively, we go after the fraudsters. Our fraud committee out here at CBA is a very vibrant community. So
excellent.
We share the trends, what's happened, how do we learn from each other. The work that we are doing as banks collectively on Zelle, and we had seen the conversations around fraud and scams on Zelle has been tremendous. The performance there has been amazing for the industry. The fraud and scams levels have tremendously come down there. Now it's showing up in other areas for other P2P companies, but where you collaborate and you work together, I think you have the advantage over the bad guys.
Excellent.
All the time.
Rakesh, thanks so much for joining me today. This was a fascinating conversation. I appreciate you making the time.
Thank you for inviting me. It was fun.